Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of the discussion and call to action on how we can change the narrative and how we can all play a critical role in social activism. We'll jump right into it. And we have to do that. One of the ways that I think is an important way to empower people and help them create, again, understanding is through sharing your story. And so I think before, we go into some of the things where I say, this is what I think is important for you to do, I think it's really important for me to share some of my story that will really, help empower others to find understanding in this space. And I think that was one of the things that I had to learn is how powerful my story was, because people certainly have a perception of me. I hear all the time, like, oh my God, you're so strong. You're all these things. But, I try to take people on the journey with me. And I think that's important to allow people to go on the journey with you, but also like share some of your journey with them. And and the first thing that they're going to do is be like, oh my gosh, that's just like me. Yeah. Or, or I relate to that, or it creates this space for empathy and love to develop. And in that space is where people start to all of a sudden decide and feel empowered and can make a decision because they start to care for you. Mm-hmm. They start to care for you, your story, your journey. They connect to it. They relate to it. Mm-hmm. And it opens that door for opportunity to create change. I used to always tell my teams, we look for windows of opportunity. Don't let those windows of opportunity pass you, where you can step into that space and that window of opportunity, educate, disrupt, whatever that looks like, to really develop something that can be impactful and sustainable and create change. So for me, sharing my story creates windows of opportunity for me to really develop that space between me and another human being, creates that space where empathy starts to develop and understanding and care and compassion. And it doesn't work with everybody, no, but it's a pretty effective tool. And that's why I encourage everyone to do that. So I think that's, that's something certainly you'll hear more about my story. We'll hear more about your story and the stories of others. And I always ask people to share their story with me. They'll hear that on the podcast. I think I did that with you in episode 2.
Probably.
Is I always tell people, like, who are you? I want to hear your story.
I was going to say, that's what I remember. Even from before episode 2. I don't remember, share your story with me. Who are you? I remember, tell me who you are. It's very difficult to do. It is. Yeah. It's very difficult to do if you haven't taken an opportunity to know yourself.
Yes.
It was a challenge.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think you'll recall not too long ago, it was a real big challenge for me to answer that question.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see how our guests
Yeah, I was. I was like, Michelle Pelton, who are you? Tell me who you are.
I'm on a journey to figure it out.
And I do when, I meet people, I'll ask them this, and, I'll ask them to tell me my story. And I've heard others, take this method too, is tell me something along your journey, 1 or 2 things along your journey, a story, because people are like, oh, my story, that's big. How much time do you have?
Or
they're like, I don't even know what to say. I don't know what my story is.
They think they have a plain vanilla, what's so special about anything I've been through? Yeah. Isn't it the same thing anybody else has experienced? And in my experience with my own journey and my own story, I think you do realize that, no matter how standard you may feel, you're really unique. Yeah. We all are. And, where your vision is, big and it's global and it's, social change. I mean, I share that vision, But the way I come at that is a lot about my own story and personal experience. And you've heard this before, but it's this idea of permission, right? If I can share my story and how I gave myself permission to live authentically and to step into spaces that I had so long wanted to be in a position of using my voice and advocacy. I mean, I don't know. I have no, certainty that I'm making a big change. But what if one person, right? One person hears what I have to say, identifies in a way that allows them to feel like they have permission. Like how much bigger do we all get, right? And then collectively, to your point, what kind of change can we make?
Yeah, no, and I love that. We've talked about that before, how sometimes people just need permission. Right. They just need to know they're not alone too. And so it does create that space where people don't feel alone and they feel like they have permission to be fully and authentically who they are. And I had to find my own personal power. I had to step into that space of being fully authentically me. In order to experience that. I tell people I would not, when they ask me, how did you do what you did? Or how do you do what you do? Or it's like, well, it starts with self.
I thought you were just born this way. You're just like, crawled out of the womb and we're like, here I am.
With a shield and here I go.
Was that not the case?
No, that was not the case. And so, it did. It started with self, and it started with embracing my own self fully and authentically, embracing my own self-power before I could have ever done anything that I've done to this point. So I love to hear, and I ask people often when I meet them, like, what are one or two things? So I definitely wanted to share a couple of stories that really resonate and connect to what we're talking about, but so people can understand that, how did I get to where I got to today? And one of those stories is my coming out story. I mean, I think for me, it was pivotal. It was life-changing. I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma, and I grew up in a culture and a space where I was told, like, this is who you're supposed to be. This is how girls are supposed to act. This is what you're supposed to wear. You're supposed to get married. All of these things. I grew up in a Southern Baptist, home, and there's a lot of beliefs and things that were kind of built into me and what was okay and not okay. And that the way I felt, the way I knew myself was not accepted. And so that, had a tremendous impact on me. I always felt different. Growing up, I was called a tomboy because that's what we call people, right? When you don't fit the what is expected, or the norm for how you should be acting for your, how your gender is defined. And so, it was a difficult space for me in being queer and knowing I was queer and being in a space where it was not accepted, it was not talked about, and this is what you're supposed to do. And felt uncomfortable, felt awkward, felt, we've heard, people like us, so like me, described as abnormal. And a lot of other horrible things
by legislators,
by
leaders in our community,
like this last year. And so hearing those things, it's like we've heard those things all of our life, and it really impacted me because I did everything I was supposed to do, and I was not living authentically. It was miserable. I got married, when I was 19 to a man, which everybody looks at me and I tell them that story and they're like, what?
Did I hear that?
Did that really happen? But he was also very feminine, so that's, that helped. But people hear that story who know me today, or they meet me today, and they're like, what? But I did it because that was what I was supposed to do. And I was living this inauthentic life, and I think about all the energy I put into being closeted, being hidden. It took so much of my energy to fit what systems, what religion, what all those things told me I should be.
I mean, you had bangs. And I don't mean that.
You know what? I cannot believe you just brought up my bangs on this podcast. Like my previous bangs. But
listen, I don't mean that in any disparaging way to anybody else who has bangs. I've had bangs, okay, and they can totally work. But what I will say is, like, look at your hair. Okay, your hair is an entity in and of itself.
It is. My hair is.
Okay, like if there was somebody who needed, like, I would say, like, if there was like a branding for Tracey Breeden, it's literally just like a profile of your hair.
It is.
No face, no like words or letters. It's just your hair, right? So I mean, that's just such a quintessential part, I think, of how you have come into and grown into who you truly are. Yeah. But so I mean, all joking aside, right? I mean, there were so many layers, literally and figuratively, as to what you put on yourself to try and fit this mold. Yeah, and that's what society does. And it's not just for queer people. It's like what you're supposed to, for how a woman is supposed to show up, how a man is supposed to be, what color, the only colors you should wear, or if you wear this color, you're sending out this message. Like there's so much ingrained into our society. Instead of saying you need to just be you and fully who you are, and instead of, no, let me tell you everything you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to show up. And I was putting so much energy into being what my society and my culture, what religion, what everybody said I'm supposed to be, that it was exhausting. It was exhausting. I was depressed. Nobody would ever know it though. Like they always saw my smile. It wasn't that I wasn't happy too, that I didn't have happy moments. I wasn't like charming as I am. But underneath that smile was pain, and it was pain that goes the deep beyond what I could ever put into words, how deep that pain was, and not being fully and authentically me, and being rejected for who I was. And so, you even talking about it today, I think I've done so much work and I've come so far. I really have. It's been such a journey, but I can still feel that pain of rejection. And I don't think that it will ever completely go away. Because of what we face over and over again. It's like, as a queer person, it's like every time you turn around, there's something, there's something calling you abnormal. There's something that is rejecting you. It's this legislation. It's somebody saying something. And you really, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of extra work to be able to be fully authentically you in every moment and feel safe in that space, to feel loved in that space. And it really starts with loving yourself and embracing yourself. So that was a very difficult time for me. I was married, and it really took a pivotal moment for me to say, I cannot continue this way, And the pivotal moment really was when my father died, because I was so close to my dad. And it brought, and I would say policing to a certain extent, because you come face to face with death so often that you really understand how short life is and how it can just be over tomorrow. And you think about, gosh, if I had one more day, how would I feel about my life and how I just lived it?
And it put it right in my face. And then losing my father at a very, he was 60 when he died. And I was in my, early 30s. It just, it literally like put it in my face. And I had already been struggling with it for so long. And my dad, it was interesting because my dad always knew, like he knew that I was unhappy. He could see through the facade. And so it was also like he knew that there was something wrong, and he was always in a very caring way trying to figure out what it was and how he could support me. So also losing that very supportive piece of my life and being very close to my father, it thrust me into, I have to live my life. I have to live my life fully and authentically. And it took until my early 30s to get to that point. And it shifted at that point. But then it was like, in your early 30s, you've already established your identity of who the world sees you, who they know you. You have a certain group of friends. You're in a particular community. It is difficult because you're shifting everything everybody's going to know about you. And then you're also impacting people by your decision impacts people. And I knew that, the person that I was married to was like, even though I was gay and I absolutely did not need to be in that relationship, it was still, we had a friendship and he was a good human being. And so I also just felt this tremendous amount of, it was so painful to walk through the process of coming out, because I knew in my choosing to be fully and authentically me, that it was going to create a space where others were like, what just happened? And it would be very painful for them. And so all I could think about was how I was going to impact potentially this other human being in a very painful way. And I knew all these people could be impacted by my decision, but it was like, okay, so I'm just going to live with the pain. I'm just going to continue to abuse myself. I do this, but I don't do it without there being consequences. And so for me, I was in that space of, I thought I would just take my life, because I thought I just can't, I didn't want to hurt people. And that's how I viewed it, even though I view that much differently today as I've grown in my own growth and self-awareness. In that moment, I thought, I'm going to hurt people, and I would rather take on the hurt myself. But I can't keep living this way, so I'm just going to take my life. And at the time, I was a police officer, and I remember the moment that I was in so much pain, and I pulled my gun out of my holster, and I decided I was going to take my life. And I just remember I've got the gun laying in my lap, and I'm sitting there thinking, I either take my life or I live my life. And something I just in that moment felt empowered to, I'm going to choose life. But if I'm going to choose life, I'm going to choose it fully. Mm-hmm. I'm no longer going to choose life and live inauthentically, to not live my truth, and that actually I'm doing more harm to people by not living my truth. Mm-hmm. And really came to an understanding in that moment that I'm going to choose life, but I'm going to choose it fully. And that was the pivotal moment for me, where I then chose and made those decisions and came out and divorced, all of those things. And what happened is something beautiful happened in that process, and me making that choice. Certainly there were people who rejected me, whether they rejected me vocally or just went away silently, never heard from them again. Mm-hmm. It was painful. But the real people who truly love you unconditionally showed up. And you knew in that moment who really loved you. And I really saw how powerful living your truth, living it fully and authentically, honestly really learned what that was and what true unconditional love was, watching how other people responded to me when I decided to step into my truth. And that gave me the power to really start my journey of moving forward. And the person that I was so concerned too about hurting really was interesting, and not that it wasn't hard for him and it was painful for him, but came to this place eventually where when he saw how people were rejecting me and how painful it was and how horrible people can be, he became one of my biggest defenders. Because he knew, it was when I came out, people weren't like, oh my God, you're gay. They were like, oh, knew that. Like they knew there was a knowing. Okay. It's not, people aren't always shocked. In fact, the majority of them are not shocked when somebody's not living their truth, because I truly believe you can feel it. You can feel their energy. You can see it. If you spend enough time with people, you can tell when a person's not living fully their truth at the end of the day. So it was powerful to have somebody come by my side and say, he was probably waved the rainbow flag for me higher than anybody else. But to see how people responded, to see how his family, his parents responded to me and embraced me, all of those things, and the new friends and living my truth, it was honestly freedom. I can't explain it any other way than it felt like freedom once all of those things lifted. But it did come with, rejection. It did come with those things, but it was worth it. It was worth everything, because it gave me my power. It gave me my voice. It wasn't until then that it really started to develop for me again to be able to do the things that I am able to do today. But it took me stepping into my full authenticity and fully being who I am. And it's been a journey along that way, but it was the best thing I ever did, was to, do what was right for me and to prioritize my truth and my authenticity. And that made all the difference in going forward to be where I am today. So that's one part of my story that was pivotal and so important in helping me get to where I am today. And it was simply a choice of choosing to be fully me, authentically. And again, it doesn't have to be the story of somebody coming out of the closet. There are a lot of stories out there, whether you're straight or gay, whatever, that you're living a life that's not a full, authentic life and being you in every moment, whether it's in the institutions you work, whether it's in the home, wherever it might be. And that is where your power comes, and being fully and authentically you in every moment and showing up for yourself first. It's all about showing up for yourself first. You're not able to really drive change or do the things purposefully, being mission driven, all the things you want to do in this space until you start there. And honestly, I don't believe you can have a full, life, a joyful life, if you're not living fully and authentically.
Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful story, and, there are elements certainly that are unique to your experience, but even when I hear you tell the story that I've heard before, right, there's so many aspects of it that sound incredibly familiar. Familiar to me and what my journey has been. I anticipate familiar to, disruptors listening out there with us. I also think it's, I'd like to kind of highlight or reinforce a point you made. And I think it's important to look at, so much of, at least again, in my personal story, that what you just said resonates with is this really concern, like a real fear for impacting other people, right? Mm-hmm. For, living in my true authenticity and what that will then mean in impact to another individual. It is a deeply painful thing for me to cause other people pain, just kind of the way I'm wired and, and who I am as a person. But I really think it's important to highlight the truth about kindness. To your point, kindness to yourself, first and foremost, in being honest and authentic, but then, passing that kindness on to other people, right? Where, again, I get that the initial impact or the immediate feel, right, may not feel good, but it is a kindness to be true to yourself, but also to other people.
Yeah.
And that's something that I hear, again, that speaks loudly to me when it comes to other people who may be listening and needing that sense of permission. But really, again, in this fear-based response of like, what happens when I give myself permission, right? I've got a spouse, I've got a partner, I've got kids, I've got, family members and friends who all think I'm this certain thing. And what if I tell them I'm not? But again, I have found in my own, personal journey that it is a kindness to let other people know who you truly are. And then, individuals like, you just described in your story with regard to your ex-husband, they show up. In ways that you never could have expected. And that, I think, gets back to that thread we were talking about with this kind of, fear or scarcity concern. Once you step out there and you truly are who you are and who, you're meant to be in this world, the people are going to show up. The resources are going to show up, right? The support is going to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's been your experience.
Yeah, because it's about, other champions are going to show up too, who are going to encircle you with support. And so I think, it happens. Like good things come from, I'm not saying it's not going to be an easy journey, but good things come from being fully and authentically true to yourself and caring for yourself first, because you can't really truly care for others or do work for others if you don't start by caring for yourself. And if you don't like yourself and you don't like the person who you are, that's going to show up in how you interact with the world. And so it's critical, that self piece is critical in our own self-development and self-growth and living authentically and embracing ourselves for who we are and just being that. There's power in being. There's power in just being you. Is what I want people to hear. The other part of my story that I think is important for what we're talking about, really empowering people, is that it's activating champions. I believe everybody has a role to play, but certainly there are people out there who I would call champions who need to help lead. A lot of people are like, I don't want to be on the front lines, but I'm right behind you, and it's like, how do you find these people? And it's really those people that can stand in a place of hope when all others have lost hope. And we need those people. And so one of the stories that I use as to just kind of speak to that standing in a place of hope is when I was a police officer and I got called to a domestic violence call where a woman, her ex-boyfriend had showed up and, she had a new boyfriend and his intention was to go to her home and kill him. That was absolutely his intention. And we, the call comes out. It's my call. I'm leading the call and going to the scene, and certainly have a team of officers because we knew this individual had a gun, was threatening certainly to kill her. It was an apartment complex. He was in the complex. He was not supposed to have a weapon. He was he was a felon, so he was not to be in possession of weapons. He had done this before. It was not the first time that he had harmed people or been an abuser. And just to talk, about domestic violence, I know that we use that term. That's not always the term that people understand or use, but it's really, violence. And what I'm talking about in this particular case is violence against two people or violence against another person that was in an intimate relationship. So whether it's a dating relationship, whatever it may be, marriage, and for some, and depending on the laws in the states, expands beyond that. But again, this was a situation where he had committed domestic violence in the past. He's there. We get on scene. And as we're going, basically we split up. I had a couple officers go to check on her. We knew that he was in the apartment complex area. So me and 3 other officers went to try to locate him. And as we're walking through this apartment complex, it's like a lot of apartment complexes. You have a lot of parking spaces, cars, and covering. We see down just, in the distance, we see an individual who matches the description of this boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, I should say. And he's standing there with 2 other people. And we don't know who those 2 other people are, but they're talking to him. We later find out that it was her best friend, who was basically trying to calm him down and talk to him, as well as another friend. And we're basically approaching. We had just seen him. As I laid eyes on him, he looks down and he sees us, and he immediately pulled out a gun and started shooting in our direction. And thankfully, and I shouldn't say thankfully, we were able to get cover, and he didn't hit us. He shot off several rounds. But the worst part of the story is we get up after we had taken cover, and this all happens within seconds. We get up, we can't see him, and they're in between a bunch of cars that were parked. So we, of course, safely approach, trying to locate him. As we get up around a car, we see him on the ground with his hand next to the gun, and he's laying down. And we see these two people who were there with him, and they had been shot, and they were both on the ground. One person was already deceased, and the other person, the female, who was the best friend, had been shot in the back of the neck, and she was there bleeding. He, when he was shooting at us, part of the reason he was down is he knew he was caught at that point. His gun had stovepiped. So what that means is the bullet had got jammed in the chamber while he was shooting, or one of the bullets. He had shot off, again, several rounds. And at that point, the weapon was useless. He couldn't use it. So he had nowhere to go, and he basically gave up. So as the officers, took him into custody, I started performing life-saving efforts on the female friend. And, she was bleeding, though she was laying in a pool of blood. So I was waiting on, the fire department and the medical to get there. For me, the first thing we do when we get on the scene, we're going to provide aid until they show up. And so I had to do everything I could to stop her bleeding. And so, I've got one hand and using clothing to try to stop the bleeding behind her neck while I grabbed hold of her hand. She was still able to talk to me. She was conscious, but going kind of in and out of consciousness because she had lost a lot of blood. And she's talking to me. And as I'm talking to her, I'm trying to keep her conscious. I'm trying to keep her awake. I'm asking her, what her name is, and just trying to get information out of her, and again, trying to keep her awake. But I also just want her to know that I'm there with her. And so I have her other hand, and I've got her hand up against my heart, and I'm, again, trying to stop the blood. And she's telling me that, things like, I have 2 daughters, and they're in the apartment complex. And if I die, I want you to tell them for me. I want you to be the one to tell them. And I'm telling her, absolutely, I'll be the one who tells your daughters, but I want you right now to not focus on dying, but to focus on living. I want you to focus on living. And so I was really trying to just help her see that and help her stay awake, but also get her to focus on living in that moment. And reminding her about her girls, and that, I would be the person to tell them, but I want you to be able to see them again. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to stay and stand in that place of hope. She was losing hope. She was losing her life. And I had to hold on to that hope, while also trying to help her hold on to hope and hold on to life in that moment. And thankfully, she survived. And that's, unfortunately, people lost their lives. There was a person who lost their life in that, but she was able to survive. And I tell people that story because in those moments when people are losing hope, and we're in a moment today, right, with everything happening in our country, everything that's happening across the globe, and just our own journeys, there's moments when we just lose hope. And it's in those moments that we need champions to rise up who can stand in that place of hope when everyone else has lost hope. And I believe that's the person I am, that I can stand in that place of hope and help people continue to move forward and take action when others have lost hope. And I need other champions to do that. And I know they're out there who are wired to, no matter what is going on around them, we're going to stand in that place of hope. And not only are we going to stand in that place of hope, we're going to activate, and we're going to lead, and we're going to move forward, and others will come with us. And so I use that as an example too, because hope is so important, and standing in a place of hope when it's just shit all around you, and it's in the worst moments, and it's when you've lost, hope for life, hope for change. It's in those moments we have to have champions who rise up and stand in a place of hope. And that's what I'm calling on people to do with some of the actions that we're talking about. Is I need them to rise up and first, one, focus on self, right? And maybe people have already done that journey, because that's where your power comes from, that self-power, but also the importance of standing in that place of hope, because we need both of those to really activate and to drive change.
Yeah. So I had prepared a lengthy dissertation, as usual, with statistics to really, give tone and tenor as to what the experience is for so many people. But I don't think that that's necessary at this point. You can tune in to some, future episodes for that if you're, I guess, maybe as nerdy as I am. Mm-hmm. But, what we want to talk about now, Tracey, is, you've made this call to action, right? We've heard your powerful story, where you're talking about your personal journey and finding your authenticity, and then moving into a space of standing in a place of hope, activating champions that we need now in the space that we're in to really make change. And it goes back to the collective power, but also the individual power that we each have. Like, where do we find that hope? What are the actions that you would suggest that you see as actions that we can all take as the one and also as the many? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I think that, the first thing, going back to everything, is that we have to recognize our power. I talk to so many people, they're like, I don't know that I can do anything. Who am I really? What can I do? So the first step is helping people recognize their power and recognize that they have a critical role to play in this. You have to realize that you have a critical role to play in this before you can convince others that they have a critical role too, or before you can convince corporations or, any institution out there, or I don't know, your significant other or your mother or your father or your friends. Like, you have to recognize your own power first, and recognize that you do, first and foremost, acknowledge and recognize that you have a critical role to play in this. And a critical role to play, that's what's at the heart and the root of social activism. It is individuals first who recognize they have a critical role to play. So that's the first one out the gate, is recognizing your power. The second one is, after recognizing your power, you have to use your voice. There is so much power in words. There's so much power in stories. You have to use your voice. Using your voice is critical in this space to changing the conversation and changing the narrative. And when I say changing the narrative, is when we talk about foundational human rights, when we talk about what is happening to communities, is we often hear, well, that's political, or people have different beliefs, or they have different opinions. The reality is this is harm against human beings, and that's the narrative that needs to change. You can't change that if you don't use your voice, if you don't have conversations, if you don't help change the conversations. These are dangerous acts of harm that are happening against communities. And when I say dangerous acts, and I'm talking about foundational human rights, is look at who's being targeted. It's marginalized communities, right? These things are happening. It's women being targeted. It's people of color being targeted. It's the LGBTQ plus community being targeted. It's other marginalized communities. They're the target of this. And this is harm against human beings. That's what it is. And so it's shifting the narrative to help people understand this is not a political, there's politics involved in it, but it's not political. Don't give me the excuse of this is politics, so we can't get involved in this, or this is, we have people who have differing opinions or beliefs. We should rise up because this is harm against human beings. If we see harm against another human being, we should not stand by. I don't care who you are, whether you're an individual, you're a group, you're an institution, you're a corporation, you should do what you're able to do. And there are things that you can do. And we should rise up when there's harm against other human beings. And what's happening to the LGBTQ plus community right now across the country with a lot of these laws and legislation, that is harm against the community. That is harm against all people. Harm against one group is harm against all people. So it's really helping people helping them understand by changing the conversation and the narrative when people say those type of things. When they say, well, if a political organization or a group stands up and says these communities, the LGBTQ plus community, people who are a part of that community are abnormal, how can you stand by and allow somebody to say something like that? That is harm against a community. So it's really, no matter what your, opinions or beliefs are, they shouldn't be legislated against a community because it's harm against a community.
And against people.
And against,
right? I think it's so easy when you do use distinctions and definitions around, a group of people, right? How we define ourselves, how somebody else defines themselves, it becomes very easy to other. Right, to other a group that you don't feel like you're part of, that you don't identify with. But at the fundamental core, to me, much as you're, advocating changing the narrative, is redefining who we are and who we are as people.
Yeah.
Right, all interconnected in this great, beautiful ecosystem that is global, right, and that is individual, but is also collective. And so I think a big part of changing the narrative too is getting back to a much simpler definition of who we are in that people space and putting people first. And to your point, recognizing then that regardless of, how the harm is defined or what verbiage is used or how it's fashioned, it's harm against another person.
Right.
And how can you stand by and let that happen?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think, using your voice is critical in the space of social activism. And then the next thing is really sharing your power. Once you recognize your power, share your power with others. There's opportunity to empower others. A lot of that is through, when I say share your power, share your story, is helping people just open their hearts to the communities who are being harmed. And a lot of that opportunity to create that openness where you share your power is in sharing your story. and helping people too, whether you're working in a corporation, wherever you may be, is helping people understand that this is also good for business, right? I mean, we were reading today about Amazon and Amazon removing Amazon Smile, which is one of their the opportunity where you could donate. I think it's 0.5 or 5. Is it 0.5% of whatever your purchases goes to organizations. And there's been a lot of backlash. People are angry, and they should be, that was removed. Apparently over 10 years, they gave, there was donations upwards of around $500 million. But one of the excuses for removing it was, well, it wasn't really that impactful. And the money, like some organizations are getting very little money. I think there was one organization that really came back on social media that I saw that said, hey, we only got $500, but that $500 makes a difference. Particularly you think about, this was providing access to organizations that don't traditionally get a lot of funding or don't have a lot of opportunity to get funding. Not everybody is like the largest organizations out there getting funding, and $500 can go a long way to an organization. And a lot of those smaller, underfunded organizations are organizations who are also focused on the most marginalized communities. So it's things like that where that it was just so disappointing to see that, because it's like, it wasn't like, well, we're taking this away because it's not impactful, but we're doing this, which will still serve the same purpose, that will help these, smaller organizations, that will do this. It was none of that. It's just like, we're taking this away because we don't believe it's impactful. And it's frustrating and it's hard to see that, but look at the consumer also response to that, that companies really need to be thinking about, and I can probably envision what the decision-making room looked like when this decision was being made, to not think about the consequences this may have on the people that were being served. And that is really at the heart of it, is nobody's thinking about people. Like, what happens if we remove this and that $500 or that $1,000 doesn't go to that organization? It impacts people at the end of the day. So we need to figure out how we can continue to support those people if we decide to shift directions and go a different direction. So that, is really about, sharing your power, is also, helping organizations see that taking actions like this, that doing things in this space to support marginalized communities, is not only doing the right thing, it's good for business, and thinking about people first and these communities first before you decide you're not going to do something in this space after you, for the last 10 years, have been doing something that has been tremendously impactful. So it was really powerful to see kind of the outcry and the pushback on social media, and rightfully so, of people very upset, and leaders and people who work in these organizations who are using their voice and using platforms, and that's the right way to do it, to say this is not okay. Yeah. And this is not putting people first.
Yeah, and I think, or I don't think, I know, based on research and more stats, which I can bring at a later date, right, that we're seeing an emerging, I would say, generation of leaders and of employees, of consumers, of people in society who are not willing to accept a check the box approach, or who are not willing to kind of go quietly, right, in the face of a lot of these impacts, but instead are demanding, responsibility and honesty, and are demanding action, and are also very discerning when it comes to where they spend their time, where they provide their service, and, where they spend their money. So to your point, I think sometimes, people in this activist space can have a hard time potentially looking at something in definition as good for business, right? To me sometimes, and you've heard me say this, that feels a little gross because maybe some of it feels like, okay, well, I'm going to play the game to try and make an impact, which does have impact and value. I mean, I don't want to disregard that. But I do think that what we're seeing is a different approach to that, and an approach that has a lot of integrity and demands a lot of honesty, because this, new generation of consumers, of employees, of social citizens is saying, we have discernment and we're going to take concerted action on where we believe you're truly authentic and you're honest and you're providing value, not just to me as a consumer, for example, but more from a social impact perspective. Yeah. So, where we can have discernment that produces social impact, then let's convince them it's good for business. That works for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that goes into the final thing I was going to say is how important it is for us to connect and assemble the action, space, and for these champions to come together and demand these things be done. And, part of it is in that demanding. I'm not telling people to just go around and use your voice and not come with solutions, but come with solutions and come from a place of let's collaborate together. And we're bringing you awareness and understanding. We're going to show you how to do this right, how to, how this can be good for business. But when it comes to the fact that, or when it comes to a situation where an organization isn't engaged in some behavior or something that is absolutely a slap in the face to the communities or causes adverse impact on communities, yes, it is time for us to demand action be taken and the right action be taken. But that takes really connecting and assembling collectively, and that collective action is the only thing that's really going to move the needle at the end of the day. We have to have collective action, and it's important that we assemble together to do that. So it's really, really embracing your personal power, certainly using your voice, sharing that power with others, and then coming together collectively to assemble for the greater good at the end of the day.
And big, bold action.
That's right. Big, bold action. And when we take big, bold action, big, bold change happens. It does. And it's really at the heart of what we do. Let's do some big and bold. Big and bold. Good things come from big and bold.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds like the right approach personally. And I think that, also hearing Tracey talk through her personal story today, even though I've heard it before, has been very inspiring. We also really appreciate everybody who has taken the time to listen in and come on this conversational journey with us. One of the things that we hope to do in future episodes is we bring guests on who share, their own personal stories and what disruption means to them and how that disruption story, has some impact from, a broader societal level is hopefully to provide inspiration. An inspiration towards the rest of a community of listeners that also wants to activate big, bold change in the ways that they uniquely can.
Yeah.
So very grateful to have fellow disruptors listen in with us. We also wanted to let you know that we'll be back every 2 weeks with a podcast episode. So tune in and follow the show, and certainly let us know what you think we're doing right and what you think we can do better. You can do all of that by following us on Apple, Google, or Spotify, or really any platform where you get your podcasts. You can leave us a review. 5 stars is always nice, so maybe that's the suggestion. And certainly, give us a shout through any of our social channels, or directly. There's some information in our bios where you can reach out to us.